The Death and Life of Cell Culture, Part 2. It all started on January 17th, 1912, when Alexis Carrel, a French surgeon at the Rockefeller Institute, grew his, quote, immortal chicken heart. Scientists have been trying to grow living cells since before the turn of the century, but their samples had always died. As a result, many researchers believed it was impossible to keep tissues alive outside the body. But Carrel set out to prove them wrong. At age 39, he'd already invented the first technique for suturing blood vessels together and had used it to perform the first coronary bypass and to develop methods for transplanting organs. He hoped someday to grow whole organs in the laboratory, filling massive vaults with lungs, livers, kidneys, and tissues he could ship through the mail for transplantation. As a first step, he tried to grow a sliver of chicken heart tissue in culture, and to everyone's amazement, it worked. Those heart cells kept beating as if they were still in the chicken's body. Months later, Carrel won a Nobel Prize for his blood vessel suturing technique and his contributions to organ transplantation, and he became an instant celebrity. The prize had nothing to do with the chicken heart, but articles about his award conflated the immortal chicken heart cells with his transplantation work, and suddenly it sounded like he'd found the fountain of youth. Headlines around the world read, Carrel's new miracle points a way to avert old age. Scientists grow immortal chicken heart. Death perhaps not inevitable. Scientists and Carrel's chicken heart cells were one of the most important advances of the century, and that cell culture would uncover the secrets behind everything from eating and sex to the music of Bach, the poems of Milton, and the genius of Michelangelo. Carrel was a scientific messiah. Magazines called his culture medium an elixir of youth and claimed that bathing in it might make a person live forever. But Carrel wasn't interested in immortality for the masses. He was a eugenicist. Organ transplantation and life extension were ways to preserve what he saw as the superior white race, which he believed was being polluted by less intelligent and inferior stock, namely the poor, uneducated, and non-white. He dreamed of never-ending life for those he deemed worthy, and death or forced sterilization for everyone else. He later praised Hitler for the energetic measures he took in that direction. Carrel's eccentricities fed into the media frenzy about his work. He was a stout, fast-talking Frenchman with mismatched eyes, one brown, the other blue, who rarely went out without his surgeon's cap. He wrongly believed that light could kill cell cultures, so his laboratory looked like the photo negative of a Ku Klux Klan rally, where technicians worked in long black robes, heads covered in black hoods with small slits cut for their eyes. They sat on black stools at black tables and a shadowless room with floors, ceilings, and walls painted black. The only illumination came from a small, dust-covered skylight. Carrel was a mystic who believed in telepathy and clairvoyance and thought it was possible for humans to live several centuries through the use of suspended animation. Eventually, he turned his apartment into a chapel, began giving lectures on medical miracles, and told reporters he dreamed of moving to South America and becoming a dictator. Other researchers distanced themselves, criticized him for being unscientific, but a bunch of white America embraced his ideas and saw him as a spiritual advisor and genius. Reader's Digest ran articles by Carrel advising women that a husband should not be induced by an oversexed wife to perform a sexual act, since sex drained the mind. In his best-selling book, Man the Unknown, he proposed fixing what he believed was an error in the U.S. Constitution that promised equality for all people. The feeble-minded and the man of genius should not be equal before the law, he wrote. The stupid, the unintelligent, those who are dispersed, incapable of attention, of effort, have no right to a higher education. His book sold more than 2 million copies and was translated into 20 languages. Thousands showed up for Carrel's talks, sometimes requiring police and riot gear to keep order as buildings filled to capacity and fans had to be turned away. Through all of this, The press and public remains obsessed with Carol's immortal chicken heart. Each year on New Year's Day, the New York World Telegram called Carol to check on the cells, and every January 17th, for decades, when Carol and his assistants lined up in their black suits to sing happy birthday to the cells, some newspaper or magazine retold the same story again and again. Chicken heart cells alive 10 years, 14 years, 20. And each time the stories promised the cells would change the face of medicine. But they never did. Meanwhile, Carol's claims about the cells grew more fantastical. At one point, he said the cells would reach a volume greater than that of the solar system. And the Literary Digest reported that the cells could have already covered the Earth. And a British tabloid said they could form a rooster big enough to cross the Atlantic in a single stride, a bird so monstrous that when perched on this mundane sphere, it would look like a weathercock. A string of best-selling books warned of the dangers of tissue culture. One predicted that 70% of babies would soon be grown in culture. Another imagined tissue culture producing giant Negroes and two-headed toads. But the fear of tissue culture truly found its way into American living rooms, and an episode of Lights Out, a 1930s radio horror show that told the story of a fictional Dr. Alberts who created an immortal chicken heart in his lab. It grew out of control, filling the city streets like the Blob, consuming everyone and everything in its path. In only 2 weeks, it destroyed the entire country. The real chicken heart cells didn't fare so well. In fact, it turned out the original cells had probably never survived long at all. Years after Carol died, awaiting a trial for collaborating with the Nazis, scientist Leonard Hayflick grew suspicious of the chicken heart. No one had ever been able to replicate Carol's work, and the cells seemed to defy a basic rule of biology, that normal cells can only divide a finite number of times before dying. Hayflick investigated them and concluded that the original chicken heart cells had actually died soon after Carol put them in a culture, and that intentionally or not, Carol had been putting new cells in the culture dishes each time he, quote, fed them using an embryo juice he made from ground tissues. At least one of Carol's former lab assistants verified Hayflick's suspicion, but no one could test the theory because 2 years after Carol's death, his assistant unceremoniously threw the famous chicken heart cells in the trash. Either way, by 1951, when Henrietta Lacks's cells began growing in the Gray Lab, just 5 years after the widely publicized, quote, death of Carol's chicken heart, the public image of immortal cells was tarnished. Tissue culture was the stuff of racism, creepy science fiction, Nazis, and snake oil. It wasn't something to be celebrated. In fact, no one paid much attention to it at all.